What would you call a closed system where members are pressured to recruit, perform, give, and stay loyal while leadership concentrates the benefits, controls the narrative, and teaches people to treat discomfort as weakness? If you'd ask me, I'd say that sounds a lot like a cult, or a pyramid scheme, or hustle culture, or even the current state of radicalized politics. And maybe that's because though we call them different things, they're all operating by the same engine: dependency, performance, narrative control, and punished dissent. Different names, but the same engine. High control Christianity is one of the clearest places to study this engine because there you can see it in concentrated form: recruitment, performance, sacrifice, narrative control, leader protection, and the disciplining of doubt. But once you see that engine there, you start noticing it everywhere else. High control Christianity is not the whole story, it's just one of the clearest case studies in the engine. What happens in church does not stay in church. It spills into how people understand power, loyalty, leadership, success, and even truth. The same logic that tells church members not to question the anointed tells citizens not to question the strongman, workers not to question the grind set, and recruits not to question the upline. Different domains, different language, but the same engine. The engine does not begin with abuse, it begins with momentum. It needs to keep growing, it needs to keep promising, it needs to keep looking like it works. It's a system that survives by expanding outward, binding people inward, and managing appearances publicly. Recruitment is not just evangelism, it's system expansion. See, this is where the engine starts. On the surface, recruitment is framed in noble language: saving souls, changing lives, bringing people to truth, or even helping others find purpose. But structurally, recruitment does more than just spread belief. It expands the system's reach, validates its message, and increases its resources. That is the key distinction. The rhetoric is spiritual, but the function is organizational. Every new recruit does several things at once: increases attendance, strengthens the impression that God is moving, adds another potential giver, volunteer, defender, and recruiter, and enlarges the social proof that the system is alive and winning. So growth is not just treated as a byproduct of truth, it becomes the evidence of the truth. That's where things start getting very dangerous because once growth becomes proof, the system becomes highly motivated to pursue growth, whether or not the growth is healthy, honest, or ethical. Numbers begin to sanctify the process. More people means more legitimacy. More momentum means more authority. More visible expansion means more power for leadership. So, what gets called evangelism can quietly become brand expansion with sacred language wrapped around it. And when that happens, the person being recruited is no longer just a person to care for, they're also a metric, a signal, an asset, and a future node in the system. Now, that's what makes recruitment one of the engine's first mechanisms. It turns belief into growth and growth into validation itself. Prosperity is not just a doctrine, it's a dependency engine. If recruitment brings people in, prosperity logic helps keep them attached. Prosperity theology is not just a set of ideas about money or blessing, it's a way of organizing the emotional relationship between the member and the system. The promise is rarely just God can bless you. It becomes your breakthrough is tied to your submission, your blessing is tied to your giving, your future is tied to your service, your outcomes are tied to your agreement, and your access is tied to your proximity. That changes everything because now the system is no longer simply offering inspiration, it's positioning itself as the channel through which the member's hope becomes possible. That creates dependence. The member learns to stay close, stay agreeable, stay invested, stay available, stay giving, because the system has trained them to associate obedience to the culture with access to a better future. And the most important part of this mechanism is that it is self protective. When the promise does not materialize, the system isn't blamed. Instead, the failure gets pushed back onto the believer. You didn't have enough faith. You weren't obedient enough. You were not submitted enough. The goal is to keep the engine innocent. The member becomes both the customer and the culprit. They invest more, blame themselves more, and cling more tightly to the same structure that disappointed them in the first place, almost like a protection racket. That's why prosperity is not just a doctrine, it's a dependency engine. It keeps hope alive, but it keeps hope conditional. And because the conditions are always spiritually negotiable, the system can always explain away its own failures while asking the believer for more. Once a system depends on growth and sustained hope, It also has to manage appearances. That's where performance comes in. In these environments, people are not just usually rewarded most for being honest, conflicted, uncertain, or emotionally complex. They're rewarded for looking victorious, sounding confident, and embodying the message publicly. So the culture begins to privilege the testimony, the praise report, the public smile, and the polished image of being blessed and highly favored. This is bigger than mere hypocrisy. It's a survival mechanism for the engine. Because if too many people tell the truth at once, the illusion of seamless success starts to crack. If people say, I gave and nothing changed, I served and burned out, I stayed loyal and still felt empty, or I did everything right and I'm still struggling, then the public credibility of the system begins to weaken. So performance becomes the unofficial requirement. People learn what kinds of stories are welcome. They learn what emotions get affirmed. They learn how to speak in ways that protect the atmosphere and keep the doubt off stage. And once that happens, the rooms fills up with people performing breakthrough while privately carrying confusion, disappointment, exhaustion, and fear. That's one of the engine's most powerful tricks. It makes suffering less visible without making it less real. First, bring more people in. Then teach them that what they need is tied to staying aligned. Then make sure everyone keeps acting like it's working. That's how the engine keeps moving, by growing its base, attaching hope to loyalty, and replacing honesty with performance. It survives on expansion, dependence, and appearances. High control Christianity is one of the clearest places to study this engine because it wraps ordinary power dynamics in sacred meaning. In other spaces, people may be manipulated by ambition, money, status, branding, or ideology, but here, those same dynamics can be given divine cover. The leader is not just successful, they're anointed. The system is not just demanding, it's ordered by God. Criticism is not just disagreement, it's rebellion against God. Discomfort is not just a warning sign, it's offense, immaturity, or lack of faith. That's why this environment reveals the engine so clearly. It spiritualizes the very mechanisms that make the engine hard to challenge. Prosperity culture can erode ethical judgment because prosperity culture does not only teach people to expect blessing, it can teach them to read visible success as moral legitimacy. That is a dangerous shift. Once members are taught that the leader's wealth, influence, access, expansion, or lifestyle are signs of divine favor, success stops being something to examine and starts becoming something to revere. The leader's flourishing becomes evidence that the system is working. And if the leader is living proof that the system works, then protecting that image begins to feel spiritually important. That's where ethical judgment starts to erode. Members begin overlooking things they would question anywhere else: manipulation, financial access, double standards, ego, intimidation, selective accountability, and even public cruelty disguised as authority. Often because the culture has fused the leader's image with the member's hopes. If that leader is the visible proof that favor is real, then questioning the leader can start to feel like questioning the very possibility of your own breakthrough. That's the trap. The system subtly teaches, do not focus on the flaws, don't touch the anointed, don't let the offense block your blessing, and do not allow criticism to disconnect you from what God is doing in the moment. So the moral instinct that should say, something is wrong here, gets retrained into, I need to check my heart. Prosperity culture, as a case study, shows how power can protect itself not merely by force, but by persuading people that ethical discomfort is a spiritual problem inside the follower rather than a warning about the leader. The exit cost proves the structure. One of the clearest ways to understand a system is to watch what happens when someone tries to leave. Healthy communities can grieve departures, disagree with departures, even feel hurt by departures, but they still allow people to leave with dignity. High control systems do not. In these environments, leaving is rarely treated as a decision, it's treated as a diagnosis. The person who leaves is not simply someone who saw something differently. They become bitter, deceived, hurt, and other labels meant to dehumanize dissent. That reaction tells you something important. It tells you the system does not merely want participation, it wants interpretive control. It wants the power to define not just who stayed, but what it means when someone leaves. And that's why exit cost proves the structure. Because when departure is framed as corruption rather than discernment, the system is showing you that it cannot afford neutral exits. It must turn leavers into cautionary tales. Because if people can leave honestly and remain whole, then the narrative breaks. If someone can walk away and still be thoughtful, decent, stable, and morally serious, then the structure loses one of its strongest weapons, fear. So the system protects itself by attaching meaning to departure. Leaving must be made to look tragic, suspicious, dangerous, or even foolish. That way, the people who remain don't ask, what did they see? They ask, what happened to them? That's one of the clearest signs you're dealing with more than a culture. You're dealing with an engine that must discipline dissent in order to preserve itself. The deepest damage is outsourced conscience. The worst thing these systems take is not money, it's not time, it's not even trust. It's your confidence in your own moral perception. At the bottom of it all, people are taught not to trust what they feel when something is wrong. Over time, this does profound damage because conscience is what helps a person name the difference between care and control, between leadership and domination, between reverence and fear, and between devotion and dependency. But when a church trains people to distrust their own moral discomfort, conscience gets outsourced to the system. The institution becomes the interpreter of reality. The leader becomes the definer of what counts as faithfulness, and the member no longer asks, what do I honestly see? They start asking, what am I allowed to call this? Once people no longer trust their own perception, almost anything can be renamed. Exploitation becomes order, fear becomes honor, dependency becomes faith, and submission becomes virtue. It's not merely that people are controlled, but that they're trained to participate in the rewriting of their own inner warning system. First, prosperity culture protects leadership by making success look sacred. That erodes ethical judgment. Then the system protects itself socially by making exit expensive. That punishes dissent. Finally, the system protects itself internally by teaching people not to trust their own discomfort in the first place. That outsources conscience. So the progression is sacralize the leaders, stigmatize the leaver, retrain the follower. That's why high control Christianity is such a clear case study. It shows, in especially vivid form, how an engine of power can survive by colonizing ethics, relationships, and inner life all at once. It doesn't just tell you who you can be, it also tells you who you can and cannot be in relationship with. What makes this engine dangerous is not merely that it can dominate one institution, it's that it's portable. It can wear a cross, it can wear a suit, it can wear a campaign hat, it can wear an entrepreneur's smile. It can wear a microphone, a podcast, a stage, a movement, or even a brand, religious, secular, or even openly atheist. The engine doesn't care about the setting, it cares about the pattern. When people are trained to respond to that pattern in one arena, they become easier to mobilize by it in another. In church, recruitment may look like evangelism. In scams, it becomes the downline. In hustle culture, it becomes audience growth, network expansion, and brand reach. In politics, it becomes mobilization, movement building, and voter capture. The language changes, but the function stays the same. Bring more people in, turn people into multipliers, make growth itself look like proof of legitimacy. This is why, at the height of my Discord channel's growth, I asked my moderators to purge it and close it down because I'm more concerned with how many we can care for than how many we can count. See, this is one of the engine's favorite tricks. It turns expansion into moral evidence. If the church is growing, it must be blessed. If the business is scaling, it must be working. If the movement is surging, it must be right. If the candidate is drawing crowds, they must be powerful and doing something right. In each case, numbers begin to substitute for scrutiny. Growth stops being something to evaluate and starts being something to admire. And once growth becomes its own justification, the question is no longer, is this healthy? It becomes, how do we keep this expanding? That's how people stop being treated as people and start being treated as fuel, new contributors to the machine. Once the engine brings people in, it has to keep them psychologically attached. In church, that may happen through prosperity promises and spiritualized submission. In hustle culture, it happens through grind set mythology. Keep pushing, keep sacrificing, stay locked in. Your breakthrough is coming. You are one disciplined season away from transformation. But even in scams, dependency gets attached to the dream. Stay in longer, invest more, trust the process, do not quit before the harvest, and other sunken cost language. In politics, dependency can attach to the leader. only this person can save the nation, only this movement can stop the collapse, or only this victory can restore what was lost. That's what makes the engine so effective. It doesn't just sell outcomes, it sells conditional hope. It teaches people that the future they want is still available, but only if they keep sacrificing, submitting, trusting, and keep refusing doubt. And when hope becomes transactional, people become easier to control because they're no longer merely committed to an idea, they're emotionally indebted to a promise, even if the promise doesn't make any practical sense. And that's where leader worship grows. The leader becomes the visible vessel of the future. The pastor, CEO, guru, YouTuber, and the politician all begin to function the same way, not merely as guides, but as symbolic access points to the real truth. The engine does not survive on substance alone, it survives on image. Everywhere the engine travels, it rewards people for looking convinced. That's important because once performance becomes the price of belonging, honesty becomes dangerous because the culture has already taught you what kind of face to wear. And the result is a room, a platform, a movement, or a nation full of people acting more certain than they really are because uncertainty now carries social risk. Once a system fuses leadership with hope, ethical judgment starts to weaken. This is one of the clearest signs that the engine has taken over. In church, members defend pastors whose behavior they would condemn anywhere else. In business culture, followers defend exploitative CEOs because they symbolize ambition and winning. In influencer culture, fans excuse manipulation because the brand has become emotionally important to them. In politics, supporters defend corruption, cruelty, dishonesty, and abuse of power because the leader has become fused with the movement's identity. Even in the atheist community, fans support slander, defamation, and libel as long as the right label is attached beforehand. That's the spillover. Because now people are no longer evaluating the leader ethically, they're evaluating the cost of moral honesty to the system that they've attached themselves to. And once that happens, red flags stop functioning as warning. They start functioning as loyalty tests. Can you still defend him? Can you still repost her? Can you still clap? Can you still donate? Can you still vote? That's how the engine turns moral clarity into social threat. Exit penalties become canceling defectors, shaming dissenters, and treating former insiders like traitors. One of the clearest ways to identify the engine is to watch how it treats people who leave, because healthy systems can survive disagreement, unhealthy ones cannot. This is the same move in every setting. Turn departure into evidence against the person rather than evidence against the system. Why? Because the engine cannot afford dignified exits. A dignified exit suggests that a person saw clearly and chose differently. But if too many people are allowed to leave with their moral credibility intact, then others might begin to ask what they saw. So the system protects itself by humiliating defectors, shaming dissenters, and pathologizing distance. That way, the people who remain are trained not to learn from the leaver, but to fear becoming them. Outsourced conscience becomes letting the system tell you what to ignore, excuse, or even praise. This is probably the deepest spillover because it reveals what the engine is ultimately after, not just your time or your money, but your moral perception. Over time, people stop using their conscience as a tool for evaluation. They let the system pre label reality for them. So instead of asking, what do I actually think about this? They ask, what have I been told to call this? Once a movement, brand, ideology, or institution can teach people what to ignore, excuse, or praise, it no longer merely has supporters. It has interpreters whose inner compass has been colonized by the needs of the system. That's how exploitation gets called order. That's how cruelty gets called strength. That's how deception gets called strategy. And that's how public submission gets called character. The real danger is not any one institution by itself. It's the repeated appearance of the same engine across institutions that seem unrelated on the surface. The engine spills wherever people are taught to tie their hope to power, their identity to performance, and their conscience to the needs of the system instead of the tangible needs of humanity. Different domains, different language, but the same engine. What starts in church does not stay in church because the engine is bigger than religion. It is a repeatable pattern of power that can thrive anywhere people are taught to confuse loyalty with truth. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. If you enjoy content like this, consider becoming a supporter of the channel by joining Patreon, where you'll get real-time updates on what we're working on, complimentary access to virtual events, and a members-only Q&A where I'm taking all questions. And I do mean all of them. Our next one is scheduled for May, so you have plenty of time to claim your seat. Now, if you're looking for community that doesn't require conformity for connection, I'd encourage you to check out Brit City. Over the past 2 years, we've grown from weekly Sunday sessions to a global campus of activities sponsored by the diversity of our membership. Whether your interest is wellness, deconstruction, music, or even politics, Brit City is a soft space to land and a safe space to live. And last but not least, if you care about challenging the narrative around non-belief, I'm currently involved in a competition that's doing just that. As the only openly atheist founder in the competition, we're showing people that unbelief doesn't have to just lead to cynicism and criticism. It can also produce communities that are committed to doing good. By voting for me daily, whether I win or not, you're showing the world that we are doing good too, and we're doing it well. Check the description for the relevant links. That's all for today, friends. Until next time, keep rising.